Good afternoon and welcome to you all for this afternoon's webinar. Thanks very much for joining us. We're running this live from our Brighton Brightwave office. The sun is looking out the window here. It is indeed still shining, and we're really looking forward to exploring with you over the next hour this topic, developing immersive technologies for the learning blend. We're going to be taking some questions throughout the webinar. You can write comments in the chat box, and my colleague Rob, if we haven't seen them already in this very small text window in front of us, he'll be waving at us frantically. So my name is Olivia. I am a senior consultant for immersive technologies down here at Brightwave. And before coming to Brightwave, I was the strategy director at an immersive studio called Ignition. Prior to that, I worked as a creative director for a communications agency.
And good afternoon all. I'm Mike. I'm head of production for immersive technologies here at Brightwave, a recent addition to the team, having previously worked for Blipper, who were one of the first leading AR applications, Imagination, working on some of their immersive technology campaigns involving artificial intelligence, augmented and virtual realities, and as mentioned by Olivia, also at Ignition, which is where myself and Olivia know each other from.
So it's a very exciting time for us here. And in fact, in 2019, I don't know how it's been for you so far this year as far as this topic is concerned, but we're certainly seeing a lot more requests for projects from clients where immersive plays a role, or there is just a lot more kind of active curiosity about how these technologies can play a part in the learning blend. So I guess historically, you know, and we've certainly experienced this as well, there are a lot of projects around hard skills within a physical training environment. That's certainly a place where these technologies have already made their mark. But we're really excited about the potential for using immersive in training what I guess would be known as the softer skills around sort of empathy and around behaviour. And because of that, for us, it's really about understanding the power of emotion and learning, which is something that Brightwave already do a lot of. You know, we're very well versed at creating story-driven solutions. It's always been a hallmark of the design here. So for us, immersive, we try to think about it not like a whole new suite of technologies, but rather an extension on what we're already doing, with this huge potential to really capture people's imaginations. I've been sort of within the immersive space for about, I guess, full-time, the better part of a couple of years, 18 months. And in that time, you know, there hasn't really been a lot of research into how or why these technologies work in terms of emotional impact and behavior change. And there is still a lot of unknowns. But what we are seeing is that slowly that is shifting and changing, and what we're wanting to do today is just share a few examples of recent research in the field, as well as covering a bit of an overview on the technologies and trying to be quite practically focused in terms of how you might approach them in building your own plans. So this quote, you may have come across it. It was from actually back in 2016. So this is John Carmack, the CTO of Oculus. He was raising this question actually at a developers conference, and in specific relation to the question of VR within the consumer space. And his challenge to the developers in the room was, you know, are we coasting on novelty? What is it about VR that really adds value? But from a shifting focus from a consumer space into enterprise, this question is certainly very valid. Can we do something in virtual reality that can add more value than all the non-virtual reality things that have been done before? And we certainly think, yes, we can. So these are new tools. We're looking at them as new platforms to deliver specifically digital learning. We see them as, you know, one of many within a learning design toolkit, but there are some fundamental differences, you know, the interfaces being one, and we'll explore that a little bit more this afternoon. Some of the core design principles that you would ask in any kind of learning project, you know, can the user find their next step? They understand what they need to do for each activity? Do they know what they're learning from an activity? How does one activity feed into the next? These things can become, I guess, a bit routine when you're used to working with protocols and principles that everyone is familiar with. When you bring new tools into the mix, sometimes asking those, you know, very simple questions is an important place to start. So what we're looking to do really is to make sure that the technology enhances the learning and that journey in and out of each media is smooth. So this session this afternoon comes out of, I guess, a sort of a suite of learning that we're also conducting internally at Brightwave. I joined 9 months ago. Mike's been here how long now?
Just the 1 month.
Just under a month. We ran a studio session last month up at our head office in Berners Street in London and worked in the room with kind of a lot of different clients who came from all sorts of different backgrounds. And we spent the afternoon just I guess exploring together what people thought the challenges and opportunities with these technologies were. And these were some of the things that cropped up during that session. So, you know, some of the challenges around making the business case, being able to prove to the business why this investment should be made, questions around logistics, how do I do it, what do I use, how do I ship it, what do I do when it gets there. Making sure that you have facilitator capability, ethics, which has cropped up on a number of different occasions and a topic that I'm personally very interested in. Certainly going to be coming to bear more as these technologies head into biometrics. The audiences themselves, the risk aversion of businesses, but on the other side, this wealth of opportunity. So the possibility to enhance very practical things like onboarding, creating new collaboration spaces, looking at real-time virtual learning, and also simulating experiences that people might not be able to do in any other way, shape or form. Along with this question of mindsets, so developing a new way of approaching the tools and a new way to bring them to your businesses. So what are we actually talking about when we talk about immersive technology? These are all quite still, you know, fair to say, Mike, slightly contested terms. You'll get into some heated arguments if you spend a long time around VR meetups about what constitutes true VR. Does 360-degree film fall into the mix, yes or no? And even what these technologies are being called, if you like, as a family. So we are settling on the term extended reality. I noticed in the newspaper yesterday that this is also the acronym for Extinction Rebellion. So just to be clear, we're not here to talk about climate change, although I'm sure immersive technologies could play a really active role in trying to avert that. But we are indeed referring to extended reality as the term used to describe some of these technologies. So virtual reality, you are probably quite familiar with this. So this is an immersive experience where you create a separate virtual space, you access it through a head-mounted display, but it can also include 3D content designed for simulation spaces. Augmented reality, or AR, overlaying digital content across the real world. So there are a lot of different types of AR solution. Some use a marker, so you trigger digital content through that. But excitingly, the advent of two new technologies baked into the Android and Apple operating systems, that's AR Core for Android and AR Kit for Apple, actually enable modern smartphones to augment digital content without markers. And Mike's going to speak a little bit later about some of the nitty-gritty technical practicalities of these things. Mixed reality, very much you know, depending on who you talk to, you might get a different answer here. It's sometimes used interchangeably with augmented reality. It also blends digital content across the real world, but rather than seeing this content through a smartphone or a tablet, you're seeing it through a field of view of ordinarily a head-mounted display, so Hololens, Magic Leap. These are two common mixed reality technologies. And the difference is that there's often quite sophisticated sensor tracking, so that digital content, you can contextualize it within an environment. 360-degree video, so filmed content or footage, which you've shot with cameras that capture that sort of 360-degree panoramic view, stitched together in post-production to create a simulated environment in which you can look around. I mean, purists will tell you 360-degree is not virtual reality. We are claiming it, putting a stake in the ground. But interestingly, if you are within the learning and development industries, tools like Adobe Captivate now include 360-degree within it as part of the suite. So this is very much something which is becoming a part of the mainstream learning mix. The thing that's really new about these technologies are the interfaces. So much of our digital lives, we are faced with screens, with keyboards, with mice, with immersive. We have new paradigms, and those are voice, gesture, gaze, and haptics. And when you single them all out like that, they can look, I guess, slightly alien, but of course these are our natural movements. This is natural controls, and because of that, once a learner is in a virtual environment, they can quite quickly feel intuitively at home, simply because you're able to interact with content in a way that we do in the real world. The next generation of these technologies bring all sorts of excitement, as well as, I think, a few sort of quite specific ethical considerations, but this is the world of biometrics. So heart rate, skin conductivity, electrical impulse, and then using that information to adapt content based on people's responses in real time. All of the technologies we like to think about as experiences that engage all of your senses. Industries are still quite focused on visual and auditory, so you know what we see and what we hear, but touch is a really big part of immersion. There are interesting startups out there who are bringing smell online, and increasingly, you know, we may even have taste, who knows. And when considering, you know, whether to use immersive technologies for projects, we always kind of encourage for there to be that moment where you just sit back and ask, you know, which of these unique qualities of immersion am I going to bring to bear? And, you know, if you can't maybe take advantage of at least 3, maybe start to think, are these technologies right for what it is that you're wanting to do?
So on that note, I'm going to pick up the baton and basically give you an overview as to the history of some of these technologies, and also a little analogy for myself as how I speak to clients and other businesses on how maybe the movement and transition into these technologies may be perceived. So I speak about immersive technologies to potential clients as similar to taking a leap from a diving board. So do you take the plunge, or do you simply just dip your toe in? The initial thoughts are that of excitement and also of trepidation. The excitement of the possibilities, the extension of what already exists and what can be created, the trepidation of something new, the nervousness of how it will be received, and whether it will be a solution by addressing problems and being a consideration for other folks. So also taking into account is the stimulation in discovery. So virtual reality technology, for instance, research indicates that it improves memory retention from the 10% effectiveness in traditional learning to over 70% effectiveness in virtual reality. So as you'll see from this slide, it's just a reminder that in 1997 was the first iPhone release. And as we look back at the growth of technology and hardware, I use Apple's iPhone as an example. As stated, from the original that was released in 1997 to today's iPhone, the iPhone 11, this is essentially a good evolution within technology from its starting point to its continual evolution. So when mobile phones were first introduced, they took 12 years to reach 50 million users. The internet, just 7 to get to that same point. And looking at purely digital technologies, the rate becomes pretty frantic. So we look at, for those who don't know, the F8 conference is going on today, which is Facebook's conference. And Facebook actually reached 50 million users in 4 years. Another example is WeChat, which is a similar platform to Facebook with a sort of WhatsApp integration, only took 1 year. Whereas we look at one of the first main players within AR, which was the Pokemon Go gaming application, and that took just 19 days to hit 50 million users. So as a brief overview to augmented reality, historic reports suggest that the first recorded reference of augmented reality was in fact by the author of The Wizard of Oz. So L. Frank Baum made reference in another novel that he created, The Master Key. And in this novel, Baum introduced this concept of AR, and it was originally described as a gift called the character marker. which to you and I was basically a pair of glasses. So as strange as it sounds, when these glasses were worn, it would show a letter or a mark to everyone's forehead indicating their character. So looking back and reading through the book itself, if, for instance, as an example, if you had an E on your head, you were basically branded as evil.
Or maybe N for nice.
Or nice, yeah. Depends what mood you're in. But the term augmented reality was first used back in 1990 by a chap called Tom Cordell, who was a Boeing researcher. And the first use of the created system was actually by the US Air Force at the Armstrong Laboratory in 1992, which was created by Louis Rosenberg. So the product was titled virtual fixtures, and this was essentially a robotic system that placed information on top of the worker's work environment to help them with efficiency. And then since then, AR has really been used commercially for gaming and entertainment businesses, which is the sort of background that I've come from, working with the likes of Blipper and Inition. But however, AR is also transforming the world of knowledge sharing and education, so making content visible in the likes of classrooms and offices, with the use of smart devices. So what actually is augmented reality? So the breakdown is, it's a computer-generated visual experience referenced to a point of focus in the real world. So whether that be a specific marker, a specific object, or a specific product, nowadays the technology is leaning more towards spatial tracking. So essentially you're able to detect a service and position a marker or a visual model into the virtual space. So a person with a smart device can access augmented reality to look, move, and interact with virtual features or objects. Again, I'm trying to make a joke out of these slides, so think of your mum, your granddad, your dad. Let's reference a date, 1988, I'm showing my age, but don't sit too close to the TV, you'll damage your eyes, is essentially what we were always told. And as for virtual reality, as we dig deeper into its original emergence, however, there is no defined moment as to its core evolution. This was simply because there were too many variants to what the term virtual reality was, and that there were sort of multiple evangelists who were trying to break into that field, but there's no specific pinpointed time. But for examples, the slide you see in front essentially references the Sensorama and the Telesphere mask. So the first initial creation of virtual reality was created in the mid-1950s, and the first initial product was patented in 1962 by cinematographer Morton Haig, who developed the Sensorama, which was essentially, as you see on the left-hand side, it was described as a theatre-style video cabinet. The original definition of one of the first patented products was the Telesphere mask, also created by Haig, and this was the first example of a head-mounted display. However, in 1968, Harvard professor and computer scientist Ivan Sutherland, along with a lot of his MIT students, but notably a chap called Bob Sproul, created what was widely considered to be the first head-mounted display. And this was described as the ultimate display. So the concept that could stimulate reality to the point where one could not tell the difference from actual reality. This despite it, in fact, being suspended from the ceiling due to its weight. So as you can take into consideration, the technology has obviously evolved, but it gives you a good insight into the progression and the path it's taking. So the breakdown of virtual reality. Essentially, it's being fully immersed. So an interactive computer-generated experience taking place within a simulated environment. So a person with virtual reality hardware can look, move, and interact with virtual features or objects. Which kindly leads us on to mixed reality. So mixed reality, again, it's a little joke from my side, but if Hololens potentially weren't constricted by the original name of a contact lens, that may have been what they called their product. But mixed reality is essentially a strand of augmented reality. The technology engages in the same fundamentals of AR by overlaying digital content on top of real-world objects. This can be interacted with and manipulated in real time. And this means of technology is obviously visible through a head unit display, or a head mounted display as they're more formally known, and the user interacts with their hand gestures being tracked by the physical camera that's integrated into the hardware. So again, mixed reality. It's merging of real and virtual worlds to produce a new environment and visualization where physical and digital objects coexist and interact in real time. The hardware for mixed reality is really continuing to evolve. I think we'll see lots more hardware products popping up, but the main leaders in the field right now are the Microsoft Hololens and the well-backed company Magic Leap, and users are able to see the digital content overlaid in the real world and engage utilizing hand gestures.
I love looking at those historical images, because on the one hand you look at it and you think, wow, it's so far away from what we have now, and on the other hand you look at it and go, it's not actually so far away in many cases. Yeah. But fast forwarding now to, I guess, this year, last year, 2018 was a really big year, and it really, in our view, was the year that the immersive enterprise solutions really started to scale. So a couple of images here in terms of use case. On the top right, you have their Walmart. So Walmart last year deployed 17,000 Oculus Go headsets across the US to use in their associate training. So one of the first really big deployments of the technology at scale for a training purpose. Microsoft, down in the left-hand corner there, this is indeed their HoloLens. They secured last year. It wasn't uncontroversial, I have to say. There were a few of their employees that were not particularly happy about the sale, but nevertheless, $480 million US with the US military for the supply of up to 100,000 HoloLens headsets for training purposes. So there have been also other use cases emerging, but for quite some time, often in slightly surprising or tangential places. So this AT&T image here was actually from 2017. So they were live streaming events to virtual reality headsets back in the day. And like many telcos, they're currently pushing heavily into 5G in order to, which I think is very interesting for us, to service a growth in video-based content. So they quote that by 2022, this is AT&T, they estimate that video could make up more than 75% of AT&T's mobile traffic, driven by growth in 4K video, autonomous cars, drones, AR, VR, and mobile gaming. I think what I find really interesting about statistics like that is it's keeping a watch on some of the integrations that are happening. These technologies don't exist in a silo, but are indeed part of a whole suite of change. In terms of sectors, from, I guess, health and retail, two of the images on this page are sectors that have been very fast on the uptake and have been kind of pioneers, retail particularly with augmented reality, and also integrations of that type through things like smart mirrors, virtual reality through actually VR shopping, which has come online in places like China quite heavily. Health, using the technologies to bridge distance, to talk about real-time collaboration, as well as some really interesting therapeutic and research programs. So virtual reality is being used to understand conditions like schizophrenia, like autism, and to better be able to help individuals. But then another couple of use cases that you might not necessarily think about. These are two former clients of Mike and myself. So up on the top left, you have the London Philharmonia, which is the world's only digital orchestra. So they use immersive experiences as part of their outreach, as well as their performance schedules. So they're looking to the technologies to bring classical music to different audiences. And down there, this rather angry-looking individual was a piece of virtual reality 360-degree content that Mike and I had the great pleasure of collaborating with the wonderful Cornerstone Partnership on. So this is using virtual reality to help adopters and foster carers better understand the behaviours of children who have experienced trauma. So a great variety of ways that the technologies are already being used. And bear in mind, these are all live use cases, in some instances with at least a couple of years traction behind them. Everyone wants to carve out their space in this whole field. What's really interesting is there are industries that have got quite well-developed ways of utilizing the technology. So, you know, PR and marketing and comms and engagement. You have specialist agencies dedicating themselves to that. Around broadcast and journalism, which you might think in a sort of a strange place for these technologies to land, but, you know, being used heavily within education contexts, and using the power of the tech to be able to bridge distance. Around the technical training or sort of hard skills, around workforce collaboration, those have been use cases that have been in play for, you know, around about, like I say, 5 years, give or take. And then there's this lovely centre ground, which is very much where we see ourselves occupying, mostly because where those circles intersect is where disciplines like learning and development, communications and engagement, education, and the dovetailing between what would be called hard skills and soft skills training can take place. So in terms of what's distinctive about immersive learning, there are, I think, well, there are many factors. Here are 5 that we think are relevant in 2019. So the curiosity factor. I guess a couple of years ago, most people could think that no one will have probably popped themselves in a VR headset. 5 years ago, you know, really the technologies were completely novel. But although most people, or you couldn't assume now that people wouldn't have had experiences with immersive tech, they do still provide something new. There is still a lure of innovation, and it's still a really valuable platform to be able to acquire the time and attention of whether it's employees or learners. Why? Because people like to be in control, and with these technologies you do put learners in control. You know, the narrative doesn't unfold in a predetermined way, and if you're talking about really fully interactive, either virtual reality or augmented reality, you decide. So this is much closer to gaming architectures or branching narratives, but with even more potential for that really rich experience, and of course a lot of the data that comes out the back of that. The technologies have long been used to bring remote locations closer, so thinking about journalism, thinking about education, that's one of the biggest and strongest use cases for those industries, and it's a key benefit for many people and businesses in the areas of learning and development where distance is an issue. The technologies promote learner involvement and activity rather than passive information delivery, so it's it's much easier to get yourself involved with content within immersive spaces than it is through either simple digital content and certainly through paper-based formats. And empathy. So they do, and we're going to explore a couple of case studies that show this, that they do drive empathy through stimulating the motor neuron system, and they're very effective at putting learners in the shoes of others, which is part of what's interesting to us. So there are a couple of case studies that we have encountered over the last year or so, both from the world of journalism, interestingly. So I wanted to bring them to your attention. If you are interested, please do research them and have a look in a bit more detail. So the first one was a pilot study. So this is being conducted by the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism in the US. And they named their study Headspace VR. And what they did was take 6 pieces of virtual reality content. It was a mix of CG as well as film-based or footage. And the 6 were Project Syria, which was created by the UN and Noni Della Penna, Clouds Over Sidra, very well known piece now by United Nations and Within, The Fight for Fallujah by the New York Times, Zambia, Gift of Mobility by Story Up and the Washington Post, 6x9, Closer to Home with The Guardian, Virtual Experience of Solitary Confinement, and a US example, Pearl Harbor Attack Reenactment Virtually There by the USA Today Network. So these examples were chosen clearly for their themes of conflict, and what the study was interested in looking at was, you know, how did people respond to these themes, and how did virtual reality affect users' emotions? And they specifically looked at apathy, sympathy, and empathy. They collected data through conventional techniques, so they used interviews, focus groups, but also started to use some biosensors, a bit of neurotechnology to track things like heart rate and skin conductivity. So matching, I guess, a little bit what people said they felt or thought with a little bit of what was coming out from those readings, without being too creepy about it. I'm sure it was all fine. In terms of the findings, it was really interesting that what they discovered was that third-person narration is actually more powerful on this pilot than actually virtually walking beside another person and being directly in their shoes. You'd probably expect this, but human characters, as with many story-based media, are the lifeblood. And Clouds over Sidra, so Sidra, if you don't know, is a young girl in a Zatari refugee camp in Jordan, and the story is, you know, her story. So that had the strongest storytelling quality and higher emotional intensity than some of the other narratives. And interestingly, for this pilot, the environment became another leading character, which, when you think about it, is logical, because in 360 it is all around you. So being able to factor in how you deal with environmental factors as a heartbeat of a 360-degree story. The second case study that we've discovered along our way is titled Walking in Another's Virtual Shoes. So this is a little bit of I guess compared to the other, which was a pilot study, this is a much heftier piece of research conducted by the Tao Center for Digital Journalism. And what they did was they took 180 people to test the hypothesis, does immersion in 360-degree video content yield higher empathy and recall? And they tested that over both a 2- and a 5-week period. It's about a 50-page, I think I printed it out just before. It's a relatively long report, and what they actually do really well in this is define empathy. So if you have any need to prove a business case, if you have any kind of doubts about do the technologies work, this is a really good report to get your hands on and just have a scoot through. But in summary, the findings were indeed VR did prompt a higher empathetic response, and what they were testing against was static text and photos. So again, this is coming out of a journalistic frame of reference, but certainly for learning, for communications with an enterprise, these are also our standard tools, so useful conclusions for us as well. Interestingly, they did discover also that there was much higher likelihood for people to take action or want to find out more, and that people did have better recall both 2 and 5 weeks after the viewing. Like the other study, having a trustworthy narrator was central to building empathy, but interestingly, enjoyment and familiarity also affected impact. So what they found was that if people were familiar with a news story already, maybe they might have heard a little bit about it, that affected their ability to build that kind of empathy and connection with the story world when they were within VR.
I think just going back to Clouds over Sidra, is the viewpoint of not just looking at it from a first-person perspective. There's a lot of impact that can be thrown from looking at it as a third-person perspective, whether it be from the narrative or the visual that the user's seeing in the VR headset. So just to answer a quick question that a couple of you have dropped in, the quote I made earlier about the indication of 10% effectiveness on traditional training versus the 70%, that was actually statistic from a study that Stanford University had carried out to understand how members of the public were perceiving utilizing virtual reality, not only for the first time, but for second, third time users as well. So essentially, their statistics are forming those figures. So as we move on to a bit more detail around the hardware itself, the main point in confusion for a lot of individuals, whether they be businesses or individual persons, is which VR hardware is suited to the requirements. And here essentially on this slide are the leaders that require a gaming PC. So the Oculus Rift, the Samsung Odyssey, the HTC Vive Cosmos, the HTC Vive Pro, the Oculus Rift, which as I mentioned earlier at F8, it may be announced whilst we're online, but I think it's a later seminar by Mr. Mark Zuckerberg, so I won't interfere with that. And we also look at the PlayStation VR as well. So essentially, what is the need for a gaming PC? So we look at these hardware, and essentially these are products that require a gaming PC to provide better visual quality, to provide a much more smoother experience for the user. There are a lot of VR headsets in the market with a relatively broad range of price points and features. Almost every major hardware or software company, pretty much everyone, is clambering to market with its first or latest product offering. With this what seems a daunting decision is that there's got to be the one that's perfect for your company, right? Well, that is the mindset to have, but the answer, as we all would know, is not quite that simple. So purchasing hardware is not so much to do with the color, the size, the weight. I mean, I wouldn't advise hanging it from the ceiling anymore like they used to, or how comfy the device is. Given that the cost margins don't differ substantially, it's more to do with the requirements and the capabilities of the technology to enable successful delivery. So the price you pay doing the research, engaging in discussions and demoing the products will be a marginal fee compared to the final delivery if it does not work successfully. So for myself, I'm a real advocate for VR hardware to become a monthly contract rental commodity, similar to how we've adopted mobile phones. But in the meantime, the purchase of the hardware is more than just that. Internally, you'll have reviews from your IT department, and they'll see this as a new technology rather than just a new training device. So with that focus, will be on aligning to its security, its integrity requirements for your company, what software installations are needed, and how is the hardware then maintained over a period. So think along the lines of think pilot, think your demo, think don't proceed until you and your user are happy. So engaging a few internal and external people to partake in a select part of your content, utilizing your proposed hardware, can provide you with that key information. Encountering deployment issues, which I've obviously seen through the time within this industry, security, the delight that is motion sickness for some individuals, whether it be based on the actual visual or whether it be the user sort of maintaining the use of the hardware, or the durability, are all essentially money savers in the long run. So with the current evolution of the technology, it appears as though a new product kind of hits the market almost every month. And ideally, you need a solution that will continue to deliver for longer than just a 12-month period. But the detail comes from these queries. So these are just an initial few that I wanted to put towards you. Where is the intended use of the campaign to be located? How many devices are needed? Is internet connection a must? Is audio required? Is there functionality within your final project delivery? Or is it purely to just watch content? We look at 360 video. These are just a few things to consider moving forward.
We just had a question come up about, will this content be available afterwards? And yes, we will be sending this deck out.
So we move on to, not every VR activation is part of a company-wide initiative. So on this slide here, we'll look at the standalone VR hardware that is essentially the main market players. We have the Oculus Go. We have Pico, so some of these will be known to you, some of them won't. We have the Lenovo, the HTC Vive Focus, the Oculus Quest, again, something that may be announced shortly, and the Samsung Gear. So these devices are essentially standalone, so very much take out the box, plug and play, download from game stores, or simply install your project delivery application onto the physical hardware. So the aim is to have the technology available at conferences or in offices. If that is the scenario, security may not be of concern, as the experience can be installed directly onto the device. Durability of the device as well may not be a huge constraint due to the period of time the hardware is being worn and the longevity of its durability. So when it comes to the company-wide adoption of virtual reality and its benefits to the user, the real assessment comes down to the results of your pilot and the product with the most visible roadmap. So you can engage in conversations with either us here at Brightwave, or even if it's the product support help desk. Find out their future plans and assess how that may affect your deliverable. So gauging whether the product you intended on using is actually aligned to your industry, or if its best purpose is for that of another. So here's a bold statement that I've made in a few blogs and a few events when working in the US. Technology doesn't wait for the vision. The vision is created by the technology. So be bold is my assessment. Technology is forever finding its purpose, and we have the opportunity to create its path. When we talk about the evolution of technology, new technologies are catalysts for change. They offer extraordinary new business capabilities when applied appropriately, and the results and its growth need to be aligned up front so that the technology can advance in the areas we here at Brightwave and you yourselves, the clients or individuals, require. So these technologies can essentially be your safe place to foster a disruptive mindset to engage your audience. Just to guide you, this is the quick overview for Brightwave as how we're moving forward with the development of our opportunities when it comes to immersive technologies. So we look at the flow of 4 stages. We have opportunity, discovery, concept development, and development. This gives you the opportunity to really assess the strategy, guide on the brainstorm and the feasibility within the project and what you're aiming to achieve. The motion in which we deliver to custom projects is essentially engaging clients as much as possible. It's new for 90% of who we're distributing this product to. And essentially, we look to deliver a technical scope and MVP product that's integrated throughout its longevity of its creation. So it engages you, the client, to understand what the capabilities are for future projects and essentially how you can educate and navigate your internal teams when it comes to the use of them. So just a quick few stats here as well to bring to your attention. 90% of CEOs believe that their company is facing disruptive change driven by digital technologies, and 70% say their organization does not have the skills to adapt. And a survey of nearly 7,000 business and IT executives report the pace of organizational innovation has significantly accelerated up to 45% over the past 3 years due to emerging technologies. So the way we look at it here at Brightwave and the way myself and Olivia look at it is to essentially tap into the resource from the retiring generation of baby boomers. They have the stories, they have the scenarios in which a great way of educating internal and external parties, create public and private partnerships and focus on the evolution. Develop in-house training that engages a multi-generation workforce. And essentially, Brightwave's proposition is that we are looking at supporting the companies we work with by not only introducing them to the potential of these technologies, but also the long-term strategy and the production of your experiences. For the emergence of a post-digital world, we as a society are nearing a turning point in the digital enterprise, where more businesses will have completed their digital transformations than not. So the digital era of technology, which began as differentiating advantage years ago, is now expected from pretty much every business, but its impact is still changing the relationship between businesses and society and the expectations of individuals.
I love, this is the thing about working with Mike. Every now and then he'll drop these statements out there, like being in a post-digital world. I heard that and thought, what? What do you mean? But actually, yeah, thinking about it, this is going to be the reality for many businesses undergoing big digital transformations, and being able to almost think past a lot of the chaos that we're within at the moment is important. We had a question come up around timescales for your process. So I'm going to interpret that question, but please let us know if this doesn't answer what you had in mind. The process that you've outlined, I mean, based on experience, it is a bit how long is a piece of string. Obviously, every client requirement or project will be different, but
it is to a point. Yeah, I mean, it varies. It's all about the education on bringing you into basically brainstorm the concept and understanding the scenarios and the capabilities. But essentially, we're looking at delivery from 3 months plus. It depends on the complexities of the project. Augmented reality, usually there's a few less fundamentals. Most people have a smart device. Most people know how to interact. Whereas virtual reality, it's assessing the hardware and basically ensuring that your initial concept answers all the queries and you have the output to back that up.
Yeah. So in terms of a few, I guess, summary points really, built around our experience, things to consider to get started. So one is around speed. I mean, this industry does move very, very fast. I mean, short term being 3 to 6 months, which is almost tomorrow, it's already here. Mid-term, 2 to 3 years. Long term, 5 years. So these are very short cycles. Some of the things that were talked about, you know, sort of 12 months ago are here. We have untethered headsets, we have biometric integration. In 2 to 3 years, we're likely to have things like heads-up display, gesture and voice control being part of the mainstream. Experimentation is absolutely key. I mean, I speak from my own experience with this, having moved out of communications and into emerging tech. You have to touch it, feel it, work with it, understand it, see it, put it on, take it off, look at the content. There's no way really around that. So the sooner you get going, the better position you're going to be in to really find out what's right for you, what's the best use case for you. And because of the speed of change, now is as good a time as ever. Some clients will often talk about consolidation. You're like, oh, I'm going to wait and see what happens, see what lands. This is likely to be like the internet Wild West still is to a certain extent. You know, there are some consolidation points. We obviously have Facebook acquiring Oculus. We have now ARKit. We have AR Core, but that consolidation is quite unlikely to take shape, in my opinion. And I think that would be a good thing, right? Because actually having the choice of these various different ways that you want to cut things, much as we have with the internet, it can be a force for good. The interface, definitely something to consider. That is what is very different. Some of the protocols, some of the ways that we're used to thinking about media change when you move into immersive. So being able to think beyond your current design paradigms. Integrating the new tools, quite often you'll find there are people within your business who are already doing fabulous things. You might not even have heard about them. They might be hidden away in your IT department, or they might be part of the marketing team looking at using immersive for PR. Seek them out. Talk to them, because they will have some great tips around what's worked, what hasn't, even simple things like what Mike was saying about how you're going to integrate it within your systems. You can learn from them. Privacy, 2 counts, I guess, on this. One is that, yes, ethics, it's already a big thing within digital wholesale. Definitely a big thing when it comes to the likes of Facebook's acquisition of Oculus and GDPR. Definitely going to be even a bigger thing around biometric data that comes out of this next generation. But positively, some of the things which have been always talked about as disadvantages for platforms like VR, that sense of being kind of cut off from the world, can be used to advantage if you're talking about things maybe like executive training or creating experiences where people would benefit from having that sense of being out of your usual environment. And learn from others, learn from us, learn from VR meetups, learn from each other. There is much to learn, and it's a really, really exciting world.
It really is, and I really recommend any meetups that you can attend are hugely beneficial, not only meeting individuals, but gaining understanding of what other companies have done. So essentially, what's your 5-year plan? These technologies are here, and more content is becoming accessible as the larger hardware and software entities evolve. Growth reports indicate these technologies are not likely to go anywhere or anytime soon, and will likely only get stronger. So what is your 5-year plan? Is it improve learning, expand on training, storytelling from customer experiences, employee experiences, or even management experiences? Brightwave's vision compromises a 3-year set of technology trends, and it's important to recognize that this year's trends are part of a bigger picture. As companies continue to grow as digital businesses, they will need to keep up with the latest technologies, as well as continue to master those that have been maturing since. So these technologies will collectively inform how enterprises build the next generation of business and create paths towards future growth. So invest in the hardware, make it accessible, and have a support team to think about your evolution.
We had another couple of questions coming in around, following on from timescale, around ballpark costs. I mean, again, it's ever a question. There's no real short answer to this one, but I would sort of...
No, I think the Brightwave approach, the way we're approaching it, is essentially to look at 3 tiers of delivery. So we're looking at the gold, silver, bronze model. So pending the complexity of the build, whether it be non-functional or functional, or whether there's a database integration, it really does vary. It varies on who's buying the hardware, who's supporting from the delivery standpoint when actually setting it up, and whether that need is required. But it really does vary from probably around 30 to 40K plus. So you're looking hundreds of thousands, you're looking, it all varies, and AR is one of those things as well. Also, what is a good source of software we can use for AR and VR? So if that's for development, you have the likes of Unity and Unreal, which are the major players when it comes to these technologies. For creating 3D models, you have 3ds Max and Maya. So they're essentially some of the initial tools you'll look to use. It's, again, dependent on the hardware you're utilizing, but essentially Unity and Unreal are the main players when it comes to those. So our final slide. Let's play. We want you to grow your capabilities just as we are doing here at Brightwave. With the continued growth in the world of immersive technologies and the masses of potential within e-learning, myself and Olivia and the wider Brightwave team are really, really excited and passionate about working with you to explore the possibilities. We want to provide you with an understanding and create worthy and beneficial experiences.
So thanks very much for all the questions that have come through as we've been going through. I hope you've all found it an enjoyable, hopefully insightful and encouraging webinar. Thanks again very much for tuning in. We're going to stay on the line for another 10 or so minutes through until 5 o'clock. So if you did have any other questions, Mike and I are going to remain here. And just while we're waiting, I guess, to make sure, see if everyone's had all the questions they want covered. I had a question for you, Mike. So do you think, and this is bearing in mind for the, oh, hold on, we've had a question caller. We'll deal with the audience question first, and I'll be able to get you in the kitchen for a cup of tea afterwards and nail that difficult number. Can you develop content on a platform agnostic basis, or do you have to determine which headset you're developing for from the outset?
You can actually do that. It is something that's probably 2 years ago you weren't able to do that. Essentially, you were building similar to as you do for the likes of AR Core and AR Kit. They're essentially 2 separate platforms when it comes to augmented reality. With virtual reality, you can do it. It's basically building out a understanding of recording what device you're pointing it towards, but you are able to do it on an agnostic basis.
And thanks very much for the comments that have come in saying that you've enjoyed this. And yes, we too hope that we'll have some more webinars of this ilk. I mean, I think to reinforce what Mike's been saying, that just because the speed of change is so quick.
We'll be back next week.
Yeah, you'll do one next week. We'll be able to announce what's happened at F8. But no, being able to just keep track and stay on top of the trends as they're emerging. And likewise, I mean, please get in touch if there are things that you think Brightwave should be exploring more. Let us know. We're always up for doing a bit of collaboration with our clients and people in the same space as us. So my question to you, Mike, was, do you think that producing immersive solutions compared to, say, other courseware, do you think it's a longer or a shorter lead-in?
I say for myself and the teams that I've worked with, is essentially the same sort of timeline, same sort of process in which you deliver. Essentially, the great thing about working with immersive technologies is you get more time to play around with it. There's a lot of scoping to be done up front, but essentially that really pays dividends in the long run. So it really does, I wouldn't necessarily say it's longer. It gives you more insight into what it is you're producing. And essentially we have the aspect of having the hardware and then distributing it to a wider team. There's videos and actually engaging people to come in and interact is a really beneficial experience.
Cool.
I guess whilst we don't have any others, I wanted to bring Olivia a question to the table.
I thought I was going to get away with it.
I guess, what do you think immersive can make such a difference to soft skills training compared to other topics?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think as we were doing lots of research into empathy and why it works and how it works, and looking into these various, mostly academic research studies, and there's a lot of evidence that, you know, how and why the technologies, you know, triggering the motor neuron system, how it is and why this empathetic reaction takes place. But I was considering this afternoon. I thought, actually, in a way, it's not much different to hard skills. So in hard skills, you are teaching people to physically do something different. It might be kind of use the spanner, use the machine, be on the oil rig, you know, weld the two nuts and bolts together. And I think that analogy actually holds true as well for soft skills, but it happens at a neuron, at a kind of brain hardwiring perspective, as well as the emotional elements that come from being able to feel kind of familiar. So, yeah, I guess that's a long way to answer. In some senses, there aren't any differences, but in other senses, of course, you're dealing with human emotion and the human kind of mind and heart relationship. So, for which the technologies are, you know, really something. Thank you very much for joining us all, and we'll look forward to joining you again soon on another webinar here at Brightwave.
Thank you.